So while reading the new Sunrise on the Reaping book, I noticed that there were a lot of similarities between Haymitch Abernathy and Katniss Everdeen's stories. I personally feel like these characters were a foil to one another. I think Haymitch was the original Mockingjay, the original Katniss, but because of the mistakes that were made during his time, Katniss was able to be front and center of a rebellion, even though she never asked for one. To understand what I mean by this and how this specifically worked and what we can take from these two characters, I first of all want to lay out their similarities. First, both are from District 12. Both characters were never reaped originally, and I find that very fascinating. In my last video, I talked about how District 12 members were the beginning and end of Snow and his reign, and I find it very interesting that both Katniss and Haymitch were originally never called out, but Katniss volunteered and Haymitch was unfortunately just dragged into it against his own will. I think that definitely shows something, and one of my subscribers definitely pointed that out, so shout out to you. Not to mention, both of them have very similar family lives. Both of them have had a younger sibling and a father who died within a mine accident. Haymitch's father was perhaps known for being more of a rebel, so to speak, and Katniss's didn't really have that reputation necessarily, but the fact that they both died in the coal mines was very striking. Both of them had to shield a lot of responsibility as an elder child from such a young age, and both their mothers also lost a husband, but they dealt with it differently. Haymitch's mother took the breadwinner role and made sure that her sons were taken care of. Katniss's mother, however, broke down, and Katniss had to be the main breadwinner before her mom could get back on her feet and go back to being a sort of healer within the district. You can see Haymitch's admiration for his mother and her work ethic and her strength and how much it's taken a toll on her. This is not to say that Katniss's mother wasn't strong, but I definitely understand Katniss for resenting her mom for letting them almost starve during her time, and I think this is why both of these characters are a foil to one another. They are the opposite gender, but in very similar situations with very different parental attitudes, but still very similar. Both of them trade also illegally. Haymitch trades white liquor and Katniss hunts when it's technically illegal to be able to do so in District 12. She sells things that she hunts to either peacekeepers or other people in District 12, and the peacekeepers allow it, and so does Haymitch. I think that's very interesting as well, that both of them are very similar in that regard, slowly breaking rules as long as they can to be able to provide for their families. They're both very empathetic people who feel a lot and are fairly traumatized, but we're just trying to survive. Another thing that I find very interesting is that they both have romantic interests. Now, Lenore Dove and Haymitch were definitely romantically entwined, versus Gale and Katniss, I would say, is not necessarily the most strongest romantic interest, but rather just having somebody that she could be able to survive with and that she noticed was fairly attractive, which could have led to a romance and kind of partly did, but we all know that Peeta was the best fit. But I do find it interesting that they have an interest of some sort within their districts as well. Both of them were around the same age when they were called into the games, and I find this very fascinating. Both of their romantic interests as well are also fairly rebellious in nature. Lenore Dove clearly shows interests in working against the Capitol, and when she sings her songs, she is bold and voices her discomfort and anger towards the Capitol. And while Gale doesn't necessarily sing, Gale himself always voices his distrust and distaste and anger against the Capitol as well, as much as they possibly could under these circumstances. Another interesting thing that I find between both characters is that both of them end up forming emotional bonds with younger tributes. The tributes that they form bonds with in the games themselves are around 12 or 11 years old. And also that age tends to line up with their own individual siblings, Katniss and Prim and Haymitch and Sid. But because they are so similar to one another, I wondered why the rebellion never worked when Haymitch was in the games versus when Katniss was in the games. And I think with these parallels to one another, Suzanne shows us what happens when you can have similar characters and similar situations within the same districts, but without the right strategies, the right plans, the right unity, a rebellion plan can always fail. So let's start with the reasons why I personally think Haymitch never even got close to ending the totalitarian regime of Panem. So a huge part in why Haymitch's actions were not as effective, even though they cost him his life, his livelihood, and his family, was that the Capitol was able to succeed in erasing all of his actions out of the games, therefore also erasing him and his efforts in history. Panem and the Capitol, especially those who run the Capitol, aka President Snow, understand the importance of making sure everything always appears perfect within in the games. They understand the power of image. And so naturally, any form of Haymitch's rebellion against the Capitol gets immediately erased. I also think, and I will touch on this a little bit deeper, Haymitch's actions are very much outright rebellion towards the Capitol. They are not as subtle as Katniss's actions, so even the slightest nuances have to be erased from all the footage in the final scenes. It was really heartbreaking to hear that all the effort and everything that he went through in the games when he stepped out of the arena was seemingly erased as if it never happened. Versus Katniss, her actions were emotional enough to be able to stay in the scenes that were showed to the Capitol and had a significant effect, gathered up hope within the districts. And even though they were simple things, those singular simple things ended up gathering so much hope and chaos within the districts. Now, what do I mean by this? I think the biggest problem within these actions are subtlety versus reactivity. And I think this is what Suzanne Collins is also trying to portray in this book. Reactivity without any proper backup can lead to burnout and disappointment and wasted efforts. This also applies vice versa. Subtlety without enough reaction, planning, or backup cannot also yield results. I think Haymitch, for example, had a very winning spirit, and he was very much in his own right to be angry and be reactive about everything that was happening to him. Problem is that in the world of Panem, it doesn't work if it is not done properly and with enough numbers behind you. Katniss was never as reactive. When they ever encounter snow, she doesn't leave a person's dead body in front of him like Haymitch did, which immediately made him a target for snow. She doesn't sing against the Capitol or scream against the Capitol, rather she mourns the person that is there, and this singular act, even though it's not completely shown in all the tapes, helps rile up the other districts and encourages them to rebel. In my personal opinion, and I'll talk about this deeper later in the video, I think if Haymitch had had the right coaching to project his anger and his emotions into the right sort of actions in the arena or even outside the arena, things might have gone way better for him. This is in no shape or form trying to victim blame Haymitch. He is a literal child in these books. It's just the unfortunate part is that in such a system, one must also be more cold and calculated and have a good balance between subtlety and reactivity. And that leads me to my second point. Haymitch's angle didn't really serve him as well as it should have. So Haymitch decided to go with the more rascal image, and I think that really isolated him amongst his teammates and amongst his own district, because he never had someone like Peeta or like a Peeta to look out for him or play that kind of romantic storyline. Haymitch was very much still alone despite having Maisley, and also the fact that Plutarch and Beatty were isolating him and giving him alone the plan to break down the arena without involving anybody else within his own district became a problem. I personally think that having the rascal image didn't really help with his image concerning the other districts, so it didn't resonate with the districts as much as it should have. Versus with Katniss's angle, everyone can relate to love. Everyone can relate to being in love with someone when they're under a difficult situation or when they're star-crossed lovers. And I'll talk about that even deeper in a minute, but I think these sorts of images and these sorts of storylines in this case worked against Haymitch, because the whole time while he was in the games, even though he clearly wanted to help others and he could have had opportunities to work with others more and the netty newcomers, he couldn't, because he still had to retain this rascal image that worked against him. Which leads me to an even deeper point. Haymitch did not have a good team, a good stylist, a good backup, and he didn't have the resources that he truly needed. But Katniss did. One thing that was a great saving grace for Katniss was her team and also Peeta, because her team and the people behind her understood what they were doing and they were aligned with one another and worked together and they had a united front. That allowed Katniss to be much more stronger versus Haymitch, who was very much alone. From the start, we have Drusilla, who was his stylist, who didn't really care about them and immediately thought that she was above them. So he already had an enemy within his own team that would never be aligned with the rebellion in the first place. The lack of mentors was also an issue, and while I do think that Wiress and Mags were a great pair of mentors to Haymitch, I also think that they themselves were not fully equipped to defeat the games. I love the fact that they just cared about the kids, but unfortunately, if you're going to send a 16-year-old into the arena with the hope of trying to defeat something so big, you need to have a bigger backup. And Wiress and Mags themselves were also fairly helpless. There was no District 13 behind them. They were sort of just pushing this on this kid without without having a really good structured plan to defeat a totalitarian system that ran on fear, violence, and propaganda. In my last video, I also said that Tigress and Cinna were extremely important to the rebellion and the revolution within the Hunger Games and in the world of Panem, and this book proved me right. Cinna made sure in every single turn Katniss was the girl on fire. By giving her that motif, even though Katniss never felt like she was the Mockingjay or the girl on fire, people could believe that she was, and that was what's important, the belief and the image. But unfortunately, Haymitch never had that. Haymitch was given horrible outfits. He was never given a united motif or a united image, and he just did the best he could with what he got. So as a result, it was never a unified front. It was never a strong image that could counter against the Capitol. The symbolism of the Mockingjay, of freedom, wasn't necessarily associated with Haymitch. And a lot of the times in a rebellion, and when you're revolting against such a system that is built upon a powerful image, you need a good image to counteract it. And I think with Katniss, this worked, again with the Mockingjay, but Haymitch never stood a chance because his own stylist Magno could care less, and a lot of the people in his team were very self-involved. Don't get me wrong, I was very happy when Effie showed up, but at the same time, it was too little too late. And even the important moments, such as the chariot riots, interviews, those moments are super important in establishing a reputation and an image. Imagine if Haymitch had the right team and the right type of chariot and the right outfits to make them stand out, the accident with Luella might have never happened, and she would have still been alive, and who knows how much that would have changed the second quarter quell. I also argue the same for Katniss and Peeta. If Katniss and Peeta were never given Cinna as the stylist that he was, they would have never also had a profound effect in the games. I mean, it was Katniss's dresses that made her a sensation, as well as the Peeta storyline that added and made her more desirable. If they never had been the people on fire, they would have never caught as many sponsors, they would have never had as much attention, and they wouldn't have made such a profound effect within the games. These simple actions created a profound domino effect that led to a whole entire revolution, and Sunrise on the Reaping just confirms this. And with these reasons, I think that Haymitch was unfortunately the test dummy for the rebellion before they finally got it right when it came to Katniss. But I also therefore find his relationship with Katniss in the trilogy much more enamoring and touching. He did care very much for Katniss because he also saw himself in her. But anyways, you guys let me know down in the comments how you're feeling below, and tell me what you guys think of this video. I hope you like it. I hope you like this breakdown. I wanted to talk more about Panem's use of propaganda because Suzanne is very much giving us hints as to how that happens, and I think in our current political climate it's very useful. So you guys let me know down in the comments below whether you would like to see that, and I'll see you guys in the next video.